Welcome back. I hope you know this bird. It's the Sankofa bird, and Sankofa comes from us from West Africa. It comes to us from West Africa, and it means go back and find that which is at risk of being lost. And what is at risk of being lost is our history. So today I'm going to talk about Weeksville. In the early 1800s, Brooklyn was known as the slave holding capital of New York. Most slaves there. And a black abolitionist, Henry C. Thompson, capitalized on the economic downturn of 1837, which was impacted by the loss of slave labor when New York abolished slavery in 1827. And what he did, he bought 32 plots of land from wealthy landowners because they decided to sell those big plots of land they were using for farming. They didn't have the slaves to farm them anymore. And what the family he bought from were the Leffert family. And if you know Brooklyn, you know Leffert's name is everywhere, all over the place, but Henry C. Thompson, nowhere to be found. And he sold his lots of land to African Americans or Black Americans, and you must know how significant this is, because this led Black men to being able to vote. Because in order to vote, there's a rule that was only for Black men. Black women couldn't vote. No women could vote at that time. You had to own $250 worth of land, and that seems small, but that was a year's pay. So Henry, by purchasing this land and selling it to Black people, he was literally empowering them. One of the people who bought land was James Weeks, and James was an ordinary dock worker, and he bought two plots of land from Henry. And he became one of the founders of Weeksville. Weeks is his last name, Ville meaning town, so Weeksville. Other residents pooled their resources together to buy land, and this was used to develop businesses and institutions that reflected their values. Some of the institutions in Weeksville were the College School Number 2. They were big on education. Churches such as Bethel Tabernacle AME and the Berean Baptist Church. There is also a baseball team. They were called Weeksville Unknowns, and a newspaper called the Freedmen's Torch. Later, they would build an orphan asylum, which they called Howard Orphan Asylum. And also they built a Zion home for the aged. So these were their values: religion, sports, news, taking care of people, taking care of the community. Though slavery was abolished, white supremacy and white violence remained constant. So Weeksville, it was built in a way, it was secluded and away from the rest of Brooklyn. And people from all over, Black people from all over, you had Black people from all over in the US, Black people from the Caribbean. They created this safe and secluded place. And because of the seclusion and safety, they believe it was one of the unknown stops on the Underground Railroad. But we're not sure, because being on one of the stops, usually a secret, right? Additionally, in 1863, when the Civil War was on the way, there were these draft riots that were led by Irish Americans who violently lashed out at African Americans in Manhattan, and about 100 fled to Weeksville. So, based on that, people running away from enslavement, people born free now, people who were freed, you have all kinds of people coming, and Weeksville becomes the second largest Black community during the U.S. slavery period, with about 520 freed African Americans. In 1865, Weeksville stopped being predominantly Black, and in the 1870s, people like German carpenter Frederick Volkening became landlords, and they started renting people. He would still rent black people, but he would rent other people of other races. So the houses on display, you might have seen them already. They're called the Hunter Fly houses, and they are believed to have been moved to this location. They are now in Brooklyn by Vulcan, so they were somewhere further away. And additional urban development changed the landscape of Weeksville. So some of the well-known Weeksville residents were Reverend Henry Highland Garnet, and he created the African Civilization Society to send black people to Liberia. He went there and he shortly died. And as you know from my video about Back to Africa, black people differed on whether to go back to Africa or not. And my position is Africa was always civilized. You don't need to go there to civilize it. Also, another prominent person in Weeksville was Junius C. Murrell. He was an abolitionist and a professional writer. He came from the Carolinas, and he became the principal of the colored school number 2 that I already spoke about. Here's some people who were born in Weeksville that became well known. Susan Smith McKinney Stewart, and she's the daughter of one of the original investors, Sylvania Smith, and she became the first black woman medical doctor in New York State. Go Suzanne. Her older sister, Sarah Smith Tompkins Garnett, was born in 1831, and she married Reverend Henry Highland Garnet and became the first black woman to serve as a principal of a New York public school in 1863. As I say, I'm not a historian, so why did I bring it to your attention? Weeksville was lost to us until the 1960s when people found it again. A pilot was flying overhead and he saw what was there, and so he basically Sankofa'd it. He brought it back to our attention so we could know we had this history. So what I love about it is how black people work together. Henry C. Thompson bought the land and he sold it to black people. Black people pulled together to purchase more. Weeksville became a sanctuary and a place for black people to thrive. And it qualified people to have power to shape macro policy through voting. When did we become so afraid of living amongst each other that our biggest dream is to flee away from each other? When did we become the most unsafe people to be around? When this is how we started, being together, loving each other, pulling together. There also we see the consistent theme. We saw it in Seneca Village about the government and private individual gaining power over the land. And what we're left with, we think, are great people of success. So we get a few black people. I told you about Sarah. I told you about the other person. These individuals that are supposed to keep us quiet because look, you got some famous black people, but we lost more than we gained because we could have a community of thriving black people and not just 2 or 3 exceptional black people. And I think we've been forced into that kind of thinking now, that they give us these token wealthy people, and that is to pacify us, the fact that the rest of us are not thriving. And that should concern us. So for me, Weeksville was great when it was a community endeavor. So how can black people both facilitate individual as well as collective success? I don't have a problem with individual success. I'm an individual. But how can we do both and not feel forced to choose one or the other? So feel free, because I'm not the source of the responses. I don't know the answers. But you tell me, how can we facilitate individual and collective success? Thanks for listening. And thank you for all the people who subscribe. Appreciate you.